In the 2010s, all opposition feared the All Blacks. Before the 2019 Rugby World Cup semi-final had even started, however, the 2016 Ireland side and 2017 British and Irish Lions both handed Eddie Jones the blueprint on how to beat the All Blacks. After Jones came in to radically transform England from a laughingstock and into world beaters, a 16-year-old me predicted that England would defeat the All Blacks in a World Cup semi-final on the day the draw was made. While I was bullied at school, laughed at, called a conspiracy theorist, all of the classic signs of a decaying empire were present in New Zealand rugby. The eventual World Cup champions South Africa later confirmed that these blueprints did indeed work in 2018, that they weren't just 3 time glitches in a powerful AI system. England had a pre-World Cup dip in 2018, starting with their first losing streak and conceding a test to the All Blacks by just 1 point after they failed to identify the needs to keep points ticking over through the boot. Everything Jones needed, however, had been completed. He had all the necessary information his team required to beat the All Blacks in one of rugby's greatest upsets, only needing the parts to execute this mission's purpose. So how did England defeat the All Blacks in 2019? Throughout this video we'll discuss things such as their rush defence, attack structure, and most importantly, the psychological edge England gained over the All Blacks. On the day itself, the England captain Owen Farrell smirked to himself as the All Blacks haka was out of sync. This was an advantage right from the off. England, on the other hand, were ready to go from the kickoff in this V-shaped formation. Having built a reputation for scoring early tries in test matches, England looked to do so again by pinning the All Blacks back in a corner. Aaron Smith is right-footed, so the kickoff from George Ford is sent to the right side of the pitch. Smith was of course able to kick for touch, but couldn't quite gain enough of a distance for his box kick, as he had a lesser degree of room to work with. From failing to research the opposition, however, Hansen did not realise that England had baited the All Blacks into doing the same thing that Ireland had already done earlier that year. In the 2019 Six Nations, England set a pre-planned attacking structure after a line-out, allowing Johnny May to score in just the second minute. The All Blacks gave England the same opportunity to set a pre-planned structure designed by Jones at training. In a recent YouTube video by Gerard Davis, he explained the centre field scrum move that many Major League Rugby sides have deployed, and what we have here from England is the predecessor to this move. The nearest All Black in the main defensive line to the scrum is Cody Taylor at hooker, who had a very inexperienced midfield combo of Leonard Brown and Goodhue on his outside. This midfield combination had played just 255 minutes of test rugby together ahead of this test, so were already indecisive to begin with. England have set the predecessor of the centre field scrum attack in front of this inexperienced midfield combination, with their first 3 backs shaped like a pod. Ford is crash ball runner on his outside, Tuilagi is in the position to send hands down the line play, as well as execute a crash ball run, so 2 possible methods of attack are available for Ford's outside man, Tuilagi. Ford also has an extra distributor on his inside. Johnny May isn't necessarily the ideal player for this position, but he has the room to boot the ball back into the All Blacks half and gain territory, as Ford has blocked Taylor off from reaching May. We can also see that there is a massive amount of space in behind while George is preparing to throw the line out in a mid-shot. The second option for May is to send the ball straight out to Daly, who is between Barrett and Mo'unga. This formation is giving England 4 possible methods of immediately moving the ball, forcing Goodhue to assist Leonard Brown in tackling Tuilagi much later, with the position of Goodhue's head subsequently disabling Taylor from an entrance to the ruck. At the next phase, Tom Curry runs straight at Savia, the only specialist Jackal threatened the All Blacks starting lineup, handing England front football without any contest as Marco Vunipola is ready to clean the ruck with Itoje's assistance. Their next attackers then plans to use Richie Mo'unga's strength against him as he uses his defensive role as a sweeper, and this will of course go to England's benefit. Daly is positioned a little wider than Mo'unga when catching the ball, which forces Mo'unga into a side-on position and allowing for the line break, then freeing Watson up to receive the pass from Daly and storm down the wing. Watson's now on the outside and just so happens to be heavier than Barrett at fullback, which then allows Watson to gain some extra meters post-contact, also forcing Taylor, a key decision maker for the All Blacks, out of the defence line again. While most of the All Blacks are still tracking offside, May knows where Watson is going to be and cleans the ruck himself, with Taylor not supported by any other forwards. The fact that May was initially on George's inside allowed him to track around without anybody noticing, freeing up forwards. while Mo'unga, Bridge, Barrett and Rees are all yet to organise themselves into the main defensive line that we can see at the wide shot. Every piece on the English chessboard has already been set, with May cleaning the ruck, just giving those extra forwards the time they need to run off the ball. England have 12 players on the open side of the pitch, while just 8 All Blacks have arrived at their defensive positions due to Smith being over here at 9. England's now utilised Jamie George as a wide receiving forward on the wing. George had already been on this side of the pitch after throwing the line out. This wide formation shows us that Tuilagi is given the time to get on George's inside and become a ruck clearance option, while Leonard Brown has to drift wider with nobody marking George. With Retallick in position to win the turnover and Laulala available as a ruck clearance though, George, a key decision maker for the team, overrides the game plan to deliberately run at Retallick and Rees, baiting Savia into cleaning the ruck and not looking to jackal. Savia's sudden need to clean out lets Curry and Underhill remove his presence from the ruck, while this also means Barrett and Whitelock, the inside men, do need to get back onside. For this next phase, Laws and Sinclair are able to use their hands to shift the point of focus so that Reed and Taylor both landed aside on positions at 123, as Ford now has a massive gap in front of himself. Ford does well to bait 3 players after exploiting the gap before passing, knowing that Marco Vunipola is in a better position to receive a ruck clearance from other forwards. These are his brother and from Farrell. Vunipola carries Reed over the gain line and lands just 4 metres from the try line, because every England player in this reasonably flat formation on the open side subsequently comes onto the ball at pace. The All Blacks still have Laulala and Smith on the inside of Mo'unga and Taylor, who are both working to bring down Laws as he slots between their shoulders as if they are a barn door. Laulala does get to the ruck and assure England's need for another phase. Well done. Retallick, however, makes a fatal error and moves far too far away from the goalposts over on the outside of the ruck to go between Laulala and Reed. Moody, having just got up from tackling Sinclair, is still trying to close the gap between the ruck and the posts. Smith is the 9 behind Laulala, while nobody is between Smith and Moody. Reed has correctly marked a Toje, sealing off any pick and go opportunities on the blind side, while if Retallick was in this channel over here, as he was that we can see from a few frames ago, a pick and go on the open side would have been able to get held up with a defender in the way. We return to the frame of the gaps opening, and Youngs spots Retallick's error straight away. He gives Tuilagi a tap on the back to signal the space, with a carry forcing Laulala to turn into a side-on position. Laulala is unable to lend all of his weight to the tackle position, while Moody is just simply far too high to reasonably wrap his arms around the ball. In just a minute 36, Tuilagi has already delivered a massive psychological blow to the All Blacks, with the scoreline now 7 times the minutes on the clock. While the score gives England a huge advantage, they still have to sustain another 78 minutes of Test rugby. For the majority of the semi-final, they did so using a rush defence system. Ireland's the world's best team in 2023, have moved on from such a system and now use a cover defence, as I demonstrated in my video on how they won the Six Nations this year. At the time of this semi-final though, Warren Gatland's Wales were the only team who had previously shown us how to nullify England's rush defence. Considering that the All Blacks don't research their opposition, I didn't expect them to overcome this obstacle at the time, and what's even worse is that they didn't know how to work out this method of negating a rush defence until 2022. As the All Blacks were still 3 years away from learning how to stop a rush defence, England were all over them. As we can see with Sevu Rees's carry in the 7th minute though, England aren't all in a single flat line. They've adapted the strategy to work in waves. While we can see 14 English players in frame, this usage of waves in a rush defence has allowed for Watson to remain back a little so we can drift off to the backfield if there's a need to cover for a kick. While the 4 players on Watson's inside all sprint at Rees, the players on the open side are all just chilling, probably talking about the weather since they're from Britain. We can all see that while Daly, Watson and Ford are in a triangle shape that gives Rees plenty of room to kick into, Curry has suffocated Rees's ability to pass over to the outside by sprinting at Rees to cut all chances of a carry by Bridge off. As Savia and Reed are forwards, Rees's only option is to take the ball into contact himself, so luckily he's being marked by Vunipola. When cutting to the wide shot at 7:39, we now see that the wave's approach to the rush defence has meant that the open side wave did not really have to move at all while Rees was carrying on the blind side. While Rees had the ball, 5 English players were on the open side. The only difference between this shot here and this shot here is that Sinclair has become an extra player in the wave on the open side. Why While one wave of the defence is sprinting at the opposition, the other one is resting. Interval training conducted by the players is now paying off. One wave is always operational while the other one catches a breath. Although England finished this test with a tackle rate of 77%, this strategy was absolutely worth it to suffocate the All Blacks' decision making by permanently placing them on the back foot. Anyway, as for how this practice works in theory, we can see they've had all the time in the world to perform analysis on what the opposition's formation is. Because Beauden Barrett shifts his torso towards his brother Scott, there is now just a single direction for the All Blacks to send the ball towards. Barrett couldn't give an inside ball to Retallick due to the lack of ruck clearance options, so Tuilagi now knows for certain that either Goodhue or Scott Barrett will receive the ball. Defences turn into attack, Farrell sends May into space, so luckily for the All Blacks, May has a cramp and can't outrun Scott Barrett, who's a lock. May's pass to Farrell is too late, so ends up coming off his knee. This phase eventually ends in a knock-on by Goodhue. While Tuilagi's intercept wasn't planned, while England fails to score any points off this wee sequence, their rush defence's adaptation into waves created the circumstances for Tuilagi's intercept and reinforced their early psychological edge. This rush defence, of course, was used for the entirety of the game. England's ability to play to what's in front of them on attack was also very strong. We can see Billy Vunipola give a powerful carry as a single-man pod towards Leonard Brownbridge, getting England back into the All Blacks 22. Early precedents from the 2020s decoy runners were also able to be found throughout the Jones-era England. This is why England's attack could be very hard to read. We can also see here from Curry, this is an excellent decoy line that should have resulted in a try to Underhill. Although Whitelock calls for the obstruction, Laulala is still in a position where he can reasonably tackle Sinclair. As there is still a player who is available to tackle Sinclair, Curry has not obstructed the opposition. Savia has just simply failed to fill the gap in properly as he lets Underhill in. Although the referee rules Curry's decoy line an obstruction, England's psychological advantage only grows. Such a psychological advantage is so easy to perceive when watching the All Blacks in open space. After Retallick breaks the line, there's such a hurry from the All Blacks to score that Savia and Taylor don't consider the bigger picture. They stick together narrowly, too close to Retallick, eventually isolating their backs and giving England the ability to use the touchline as an extra defender. 3 defenders are all over Goodhue after Barrett's pass, but so calmly as well. A turnover from Sam Underhill in the 38th minute also gets England ahead by 10-0 at half-time, but when England go to the changing rooms, we can't really see too much cockiness from them either. Eddie Jones's hiring of a sports psychologist has always been huge. They are aware that they're only halfway through. Against a team with so much natural talent, no scoreline is safe. While the All Blacks are still technically in the game based on the scoreline at halftime, England continue their edge into the second half with 2 intercepts in a row as Youngs reads a pass from Rees. With Savia in front, Youngs grubbers forward knowing that he has George on his inside to complete the tackle and put the All Blacks back into a corner. George, however, hesitates behind Aaron Smith to wait for the perfect moment. Farrell sprints in and smashes Barrett backwards. What we can now see from George is excellent. Itoje gets straight over the ball and George allows Itoje to jackal instead. He wraps his right arm around Itoje's left arm, handing Itoje his weight so that Laulala cannot move them once he enters. George's body position makes Itoje impossible to move, as England now have the right to kick for touch. George and Itoje's club level cohesion from Saracens turns up again for the line out before Youngs detaches, dummies, and lets out a mighty roar as he delivers the killer blow of the game. Although there's a very clear and obvious forward pass in the maul to disallow the try, England have not just crossed the try line in 2 minutes in the first half, but 5 minutes into the second half. If there's one thing that I know about World Cups in the 3 that I've watched in my entire life, it's that they're one on momentum. The fact that the All Blacks midfield was sucked in by Tuilagi so easily, with the captain buying Youngs as dummy, was just a blow they simply couldn't recover from, although Eddie Jones's reaction would tell us otherwise. Anyway, now that we've finished the ad break and we've started discussing other attacking structures we've seen from England, in the 47th minute, we see another really interesting formation from set piece with just 4 men in the line-out and George at hooker. They've got the remaining 3 forwards on the outside forward. Marco Vunipola is in the centre of this 3-man pod with a loose forward on either side of him. His brother is a little bit further away in the event that an opportunity to skip past a Slate arrives, while Underhill is in a really reasonable position to pop it back inside to Daly, who has come up from the back field. While we can use the blue line to see the very obvious hands down the line possibility, the flatness of the pod has provided provided the opportunity for variety that Daly and Watson can eventually adopt off their boots to kick in behinds to, while behind the pod is Tuilagi, who has come off the wing to become a clean-out option. To generate the front foot ball, Ford simply has to select the carrier who can be cleaned out the easiest. While this formation ended up failing with the pass going to ground, it was a pretty cool innovation for the time that showed the comprehensive thinking behind how England could starve the All Blacks of possession in areas outside their 22. Curry bails England out despite Ford's bad pass, with the attack continuing for multiple phases. This huge emphasis on dominating the breakdown and ensuring every carrier had a clean-out option eventually began to frustrate the All Blacks, who finished the match having conceded 11 penalties. We now focus on Sam Cane as an example of this ill discipline. While Youngs is attempting to send Watson through the gap between Whitelock and Retallick, with Billy Vunipola as a decoy runner, Cane goes in Vunipola and tackles him off the ball. Cole, the nearest ruck clearance option, is well behind. Whitelock, the man who should be captain instead, reads the play very well as there are no ruck clearance options close to Vunipola, while Cane doesn't take the time to read this at all. He rushes up and gives Ford a shot at goals from straight in front of the posts, and goodness me has Kane's discipline improved since this game. Compare the England attack to the All Blacks attack. As we watch a few segments from this period of play, the All Blacks just didn't really have any structure at all during this period of the game. Reece eventually ends up with the ball out wide because Daly comes off the wing and doesn't trust Tuilagi to take down Williams. While I was expecting most Kiwis to blame the ref for the result at the end of this game due to Slade only getting a single arm to Reece, we can see that one of them was clearly rapping the best team was just simply ahead on the scoreboard. While Reece went to touch, the All Blacks only try of the game ends up getting scored anyway, thanks to Savia catching just one of two missed throw-in England lineouts on the day. I don't think there's anything to analyse out of this try. It's a pure fluke that essentially sums up the Hansen and the Foster eras. Despite this try being scored in the 57th minute, the psychological advantage that England had from the very beginning had at this point permanently taken hold of the game. All they needed from there was to use their rush defence to see the game out, and we can clearly see this rush defence working really well with the All Blacks losing metres carry after carry and just having nothing to respond with deep into the 80th minute. Now guys, this game to me summed up Steve Hansen's career as a head coach. It was a huge showcasing of his true abilities as a head coach without any inherited talent from Graham Henry to hide behind. Reid, Williams and Whitelock were the only survivors left from the 2011 Rugby World Cup. This game was also perhaps the strongest example of how much good Eddie Jones did for England. While the team had such a strong pack, Jones's attention to detail and trust in his backs allowed them to play with such a free, spirited usage of structure that only the eventual World Cup winners did better, and no other England team I've ever seen has done better before. But most of all, this loss represented the point of no return for New Zealand rugby. According to most credible historians, every empire has 5 stages, from expansion to stabilisation, decay, then finally, the long night that establishes the end of an empire before a renaissance years down the line. While Sir Graham Henry's tenure marks the stabilisation era, the Hansen era marks the start of the decay. New Zealand rugby, it was in a really difficult place in 2007, with Henry stabilising this difficulty via innovations such as pods, the usage of depth charts to build depth in his jerseys, and of course, the usage of a wide receiving forward in the form of either Kevin Mialamu or Jerome Kano as a single-man pod. Hansen had become so fascinated with the players who stood out under his old boss that he forgot the fundamentals at the breakdown and the scrum that made the Nonus, Barretts and Smiths able to stand out in the first place. This loss to England was not only marred by his decision to completely ignore the breakdown when the All Blacks were defending, but it was marred by the fact that seeing the error of his ways far too late gave him no other option to go for besides players in form. Form is something that experience isn't required to achieve, hence his team's overall lack of cohesion. World Cups, they are won on experience. For all these imaginative and grafting processes England went through, the All Blacks had nothing to fire back with. Despite the vast majority of the All Blacks' losses in the professional era being followed by calls to drop the 10, blaming the ref, accusations of cheating, there was none of that after the absolute demolishing that England dished out in 2019. I worked in a bar at the time of this game, and every single customer I spoke to put their hands up and stated, England deserved to win. The entirety of New Zealand rugby has suffered the same fate as Hanson's All Blacks, with every amateur rugby club, NPC team and Super Rugby team all using the same variations of the same game plan devised by Henry, inherited by Hanson, and we have truly seen the long night that killed the Empire. Jones's England, after working off the information they gained from watching the 2016 Ireland victory, playing in the 2017 Lions tour, and then watching the 2018 South Africa loss, delivers the killer blow that will take away the All Blacks' psychological edge, perhaps forever. While a renaissance and a new empire will arise with Scott Robertson now waiting in the wings, the aftermath of the 2019 Rugby World Cup will leave Razor with an unfortunate and crucial disadvantage that no Tier 1 nation in the present day fears the All Blacks. Hey everybody, took ages and ages and ages to make that video, so that's why I've been absent for, goodness me, like a whole week and stuff. Just finished it, and I'm really thankful to you guys over on my Patreon who are giving me the fuel to keep me going and stuff. Big shout out to you guys who are my patrons. Just remember as well to support me over on Instagram, over on Twitter, and of course my opinion journalism website to see the extra content that I've got coming. It's World Cup season, so I thought that for this video I would start building the hype for 2023 by looking back at classic test matches and just analyse how they went and the long-term impacts of them. My next classic analysis for a rugby match is going to be on the 2017 British and Irish Lions tour. Suggest another one you want me to cover in the comments down below, and I'm going to see you later next time. Cheers everybody, from Max.